Raylib is a lightweight, beginner-friendly, and open-source C library for game development, known for its simplicity and lack of external dependencies. It's designed to streamline the creation of 2D and 3D games, and has an intuitive API for managing graphics, audio, and input. Ramon Santamaria is the founder and lead developer of Raylib. He joins the show with Joe Nash to talk about the Raylib project. Joe Nash is a developer, educator, and award-winning community builder who has worked at companies including GitHub, Twilio, Unity, and PayPal. Joe got his start in software development by creating mods and running servers for Gary's Mod, and game development remains his favorite way to experience and explore new technologies and concepts.
Ray, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello, Joe. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, as we mentioned, you are developer of Raylib, which I'm sure lots of our audience are familiar with, a fantastic C library for, game development and all kinds of other, graphical application development. What I want to start with is the path leading up to Raylib, which, as I understand it, is 11 years old today. So we've got quite a journey. Where did your interest in game development come from? Like way back before Raylib, what led you to where we are today?
Well, actually, before Raylib, I was working in video games development. I worked in EA for some years and also work in small companies. I also tried to create my own company, published a couple of mobile games for Windows Phone at that moment. And after that, I got a job as a professor in a private education institution. Actually, it was the first one to start teaching video games, an official video game development course here in Spain, I think, actually. And my task was teaching video games programming to mostly art students. And yeah, that was a challenge because, usually the art students were not that interested in programming. The first option was using some kind of no-code tool like drag and drop. At the moment, it was kind of the beginning of Unity getting into the market. But I decided to go low level and I really tried to teach actual programming to art students. And to do so, I did some tests. I started with C and I checked some libraries out there. And after some months of trying different approaches, I found one that actually worked. That was a very, very old library called Borland BGI Graphics. That's from the 70s, maybe. And surprisingly, it worked extremely well because it was super simple, like init, close, draw. It was super simple. After that first year teaching, I decided to create an alternative to BGI, but more adapted to modern times. Well, modern times at that moment mean OpenGL. And I did so. It was a weekend project, actually, really. And just in a couple of months, I got a first version quite complete with a lot of functionality to do some 2D, to do some 3D and everything. I start testing or using it with the students. And also surprisingly, it worked super, super good. The students were super engaged with the library and almost all the students were able to create a POM. At that moment was the assignment in the subject. And they really enjoyed programming, but not only they enjoyed creating games, but they enjoyed the fact of writing code in a quite raw way with Notepad and compiling and running their games. And yeah, that was the origin of the library. But from there, I start getting a lot of feedback because the students were quite excited about the library. I start asking for improvements, reporting bugs, letting other students from other institutions know about the library, and the library started growing. And well, at that point, I thought that it could be interesting to keep working on it. I actually released it as open source because I thought it was the best option for education and to reach a wider audience. And yeah, and it started growing. At that moment, I was reactivating my company, the previous one that I had published Windows Phone games. But at that moment, I started working in the library with few students. The plan was to keep working on games, games development. Actually, we released a PS Vita game at that time, but most of the day was working in Raylib. So it was like 6 hours per day working in the school, teaching with Raylib, but then there was another 6 hours every day working in the office with some students developing Raylib.
Incredible.
It went, yeah, and it went for about 6 years that way, something like that, 5, 6 years. And yeah, and Raylib kept growing and growing and growing. And then at some point, after those first 5, 6 years, I got an email from Google that they were giving me an award for the open source project. And yeah, the library started getting recognition in a lot of places and start to growing really, really, well, becoming really, really big. And yeah, since that moment, for the last 5 years, actually, I quit at that moment teaching to focus 100% in the company to not only develop Raylib, but also develop an ecosystem around Raylib with some auxiliary libraries and to develop tools focused for video games development, but always using Raylib as the base technology. So the technology kept growing along all the other products around it also were built. And yeah, that's mostly today.
That's awesome.
At this moment, Raylib is super big. Yeah, it's unbelievable the point it has reached right now. And
Yeah,
well,
for sure.
actually, it's unbelievable that I've been living years doing that.
Yeah, it's a huge achievement. I think I saw, and we'll be talking about it a bit today, but you've just released Raylib 5.5, and I think I saw, was it 150 contributors to 5.5?
Yeah, about 150 for this release alone.
Yeah.
But about 650 overall.
That's awesome.
Along the years.
Yeah, that is a huge achievement. And also, just going back to that, the early days in that first class, I think you must have had the most engaged class of students in the world to share the library and start contributing to it. That's awesome. I definitely want to ask you, just from an educator's perspective, about how you approach that task of, choosing C to teach art students. So we'll get to that later on. But for now, I guess to settle on Raylib, before we get into all of the details, I guess for folks who aren't aware, can you run us briefly through how Raylib works, what it is and what it does and what it's used for? Kind of a high level introduction to the library, I guess.
Yeah, actually, the library itself is quite simple in terms of programming. I mean, not internally, but the API, it's quite simple. It's a C library, so there is no any kind of abstraction like object-oriented programming or anything. It's just functions, procedural programming, and structures with data. Mostly all the structures are completely transparent. I mean, they are not opaque pointers to some internal structure. So you can, when you create an image or a texture, you just define it like any other kind of variable, and you have directly access to my image point, width, height, format, and everything. So it's all the library itself is kept, or I try to keep it as much simple as possible. Always thinking in those first users of the library, the students are not any kind of students that mostly have an art profile, and they usually start not interested in code. But many of them actually, after some courses, have ended up working as a programmers in different companies. So that's amazing. So simplicity is one of the key points of the library. Besides that, the library tries to cover mostly the basic functionality that you need to make a small or mid-sized game. You got functionality to manage the window, the inputs, all kind of inputs, keyboard, mouse, gamepad. You have functionality to load images, to upload them into GPU as textures, to load models, the meshes, the materials. Well, that's kind of the most advanced functionality that has been added along the years. Then you have some basic collision detection functionality. You also got a small math library included that actually it's portable, that you can be used outside of Raylib. And you also have some basic functionality to draw textures, models, and to play audio, to load audio and to play audio. So it covers most of the basic functionalities that you need for video games development. About the architecture of the library, since the beginning, it was designed in a way that it was very, very modular. I always thought, okay, it only has 7 modules, so and that means 7 C files. So that's intended to simplify the build system, because in the past I struggled a lot with build systems And I decided to simplify that. Actually, when I was at EA, I was in charge of build pipelines and text pipelines, audio pipelines, and I know how complex can it be actually. And I try to simplify building at maximum. So I try to keep all the library very small and self-contained in terms of architectures. But I also try to make all the modules independent from each other and being able to use them as much as possible as an independent library that you can take out from Raylib and include into your engine or into your program to just do some of the functionality that you need. For example, the audio module, it's completely self-contained, decoupled of anything. So you can just pick up the audio module that are a C file with some headers, dependencies. You need the audio device, load some audio file, multiple formats are supported, it's configurable also, play the audio and close the audio device. So it's focused on that kind of simplicity. The same for the shapes module. In the shapes module, it's quite self-contained. It only depends on a bunch of functions to create vertex. Well, I think it depends on 6-7 basic functions to define the vertex data. But then the module is self-contained. So if you want a module to create shapes or kind of shapes like circles, rings, rectangles, rounded border rectangles, well, lots of types of shapes, you can just pick that module. And again, it's the same. Okay, you have to provide like 7 functions, but mostly any engine already gives you those 7 functions. And well, that's the same with every module. Then another of the important parts of the library, it's an abstraction layer over OpenGL. Actually, it's one of the key parts of the library. It's called RLGL, and it's a kind of a mapping of multiple OpenGL versions from legacy OpenGL to modern OpenGL into immediate mode OpenGL, kind of. Okay, you also have all the extra functionality to load the meshes and the vertex buffer and everything, but it has a small set of functions that let you just use that library like the immediate mode OpenGL 1.1. And actually that proved to be very, very, very useful because in this latest release, I saw that some people ported Raylib to work on all consoles, on retro consoles and homebrew consoles. And that was thanks to that support for the OpenGL 1.1, well, backend, because it's one of the backends. It's not the default one. By default, it uses OpenGL 3.3 and OpenGL ES 2.0 on web, Android, and Raspberry Pi or embedded devices. But yeah, that was one of the modules that I think it's more useful. But well, summarizing all together, because I think I am going into many topics. The library itself, it's intended to basically draw anything on any kind of display. It could be a game, it could be a demo, it could be some kind of multimedia application, it could be a tool, or yeah, anything. And considering it's C and it supports a really wide number of platforms, yeah, actually I've seen the library used for many kinds of applications, not only games. And actually, I'm an electronic engineer, and I love seeing the library running on embedded devices for some kind of display or anything. And yeah, that I love every time I see that running in an embedded device.
Yeah, that's always exciting. I always think of, I think that the classic example is like people putting Doom on silly things, right? And whenever there's like that on a new thing, I always get excited by it. So I can only imagine when it's your library that ends up being on, like a pregnancy test or whatever it is, people are putting stuff on. That's awesome. Okay, God, so much to talk about. So I want to come back to things like the console support and some of the features of the library that you mentioned, like collision detection. But I guess to start with, you started at the beginning talking about your principles of the API design and, wanting to keep things simple. Given the background of the project, that totally makes sense. But, it's been 11 years. You've had like loads of different users come. The library, the audience has really grown. So I'm really interested in, in how you approach API design. In design, there's 380 functions. There was an update in 5.5. There's like a lot of functions now. There's a big API surface area. So how do you think about the design of that API now, with the past, present, and future audiences?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, at the moment, Raylib 1.0 started with 80 functions, only 80 functions, that I thought that was enough to make many kinds of games. But Raylib 5.5 has reached the 580 functions. So
It was
yeah,
a little bit off. Yeah, that's great. That's awesome.
But I also have to say that a couple of years ago, I did an analysis of the market and I looked for all the open source GitHub repos using Raylib that I could find. And I compiled like 200 repos or so. And I did some text analysis, text scrapping, and I listed the most used Raylib functions in all the source files found in those 200 repos. And guess what? What was the surprise? Were the most used functions. Actually, were the 81st functions from the
That's
library.
amazing. That's
The
such a
simple
cool
ones,
idea
like
as well.
yeah, init window, close window, draw rectangle, begin drawing and drawing, draw circle. I mean, load texture, draw texture. I mean, the simple ones were the most used ones.
Yeah.
I mean, it also there is some bias here, obviously, because at that moment the library has been in the market for 8 years, and yeah, people start and they use the first function. So there is some bias in that analysis, obviously. But many of the advanced functions added to the library were barely used, actually. There was not many people using them. And yeah, it was surprising. But as I'm answering your question now, how I approach the API, simplicity is always the key for me. And sometimes I have some discussions about that on the Discord or with the contributors of the library, because sometimes they try to add more functionality and I have to say no, not because it's not useful, but because it belongs to another level. I try to keep the library at a kind of a low level. And it's recommended that if you want to use it to make a mid-game, you build your small engine over it and add that functionality in that level, but not in the low level. So I try to keep the library at low level. About things that I always keep in mind, for example, the function names. Function names always follow the same pattern. They try to follow the natural language. So as much as possible, do not follow a programmer language, because when you code, you tend to use the technical terms that you should use to name everything. And sometimes if you think of the people that is going to use the library, that maybe it's people with not that much experience, it's easier for them to name the functions with some easier names. All the functions usually follow the pattern that verb, subject, and object. They are usually 2-3 words, 3 words at maximum, sometimes maybe 4 words, but I try to keep it in that way always the same. Also, in the name of parameters, I try to keep always under 5-6 parameters, always. And yeah, that's
Yeah, that's a great basic.
That's more it. So I try to keep it simple all the time. That's my objective. So sometimes it's not easy because you have to do things that get complicated, and yeah, it's not easy to always keep it simple. But that's the objective. If things turn to be too complicated, or the functionality to add turns to be too complicated, I try to abstract as much as possible. If it's a low-level functionality, I try to keep internal of Raylib and just expose the minimum required for most of the users, and then maybe allow some flags, some build flags, or some additional configuration options to configure more advanced functions. Or otherwise, I evaluate if that functionality maybe belongs to a lower level, and then it shouldn't be in Raylib, but maybe in an auxiliary library or a secondary library. I actually got some of those secondary libraries. I got Raylib, that it's a library to create UIs, mostly intended for tooling, but it has a lot of immediate mode UI functionality. Got also REST for resources packaging. That's also another library. Well, I got random number generator. I got several auxiliary libraries that, well, are kind of in that Raylib ecosystem and are intended for users that need that extra functionality for their specific project, can use those libraries. Actually, last year or so, like 1 year ago or 1 year and a half ago, one Raylib developer in the community created a separate organization, a separate repository called Raylib Extras, that has proven to be very, very, very useful, because For all that people that came to the community asking for advanced functionality, a common answer is, oh, maybe not for Raylib, but you can add that to Raylib extras. And it's usually an additional library or additional template or whatever module that does not need to be in the core library, because maybe it's not useful for many, many people. But it could be interesting to have it sometimes, well, like a binary partition or some kind of additional functionality that, for example, in the community, there are a lot of people coming wanting to make a Minecraft. Okay, that's very common.
I did notice that the cover image in your Discord was like a voxel, like rendering.
Yeah, there is a lot of users that are starting with Raylib and come to the community and, oh, I want to make a Minecraft. And it's okay. And they start, okay, so what we need some kind of octree and all that. Well, in Raylib Extras, actually, there is a kind of a Minecraft template with everything set up with a lot of extra functionality, and it can be used as a reference. So not everything has to be in Raylib.
Yeah, and we'll come back to community management in a bit as well, because I think the way you manage the ecosystem is really incredible. But that concept of like, hey, I'm an open source maintainer with a very well specified focus project, and lots of people have lots of enthusiasm. So there's a space where they can have that enthusiasm that's separate. That is a very nifty solution. So going back to one of the things you mentioned parameters. This is one of the areas that I think is really interesting, particularly about, well, API design with C, but also particularly for your audience, which is, when you get to thinking about your data structures in C and teaching beginners and people who aren't programmers and dealing with pointers and dealing with how you parameterize your functions. What is your approach to that? Because that just seems like an area of endless foot guns for library designers in C trying to teach beginners.
Well, actually, I forgot to mention about that. The objective at the beginning was avoiding pointers at all.
Right.
So the first set of functions for Raylib had no pointers at all. All the data structures were just passed to the different functions by value. That's it. It has some problems related to that, but yeah, they are not that bad. What I tried was minimize the size of all the structures provided. Actually, the structures are quite small, usually under 32, 48 bytes. So it's acceptable to pass them by value. And yeah, that was one of the objectives. With the years, the library has kept growing. And now, obviously you have some more advanced functions that require pointers. But I think they are out maybe 20 or 30 out of 580. So it's in some cases where you really need pointers, because you have to load data. For example, in an image, you have to load data. Then the pointer is just kept inside the structure. So you got the structure with width, height, format, min-maps, and the pointers to data. Or if it's textures, well, the data is already in the GPU, so you got the identifier, so that's easier. But what I tried is to keep it simple for those students. Later on, in the last few years, I've been also teaching programming in the university for computer science students. And that's a completely different mentality, because I mean, for them, they usually love programming, and they usually love to go as much technical as possible and go into details. But actually, even though the beginning of this year, I was teaching in the university to computer science students. Well, actually, I was teaching Unity. But I had to teach in the syllabus about programming patterns, solid concepts, and all these information. And I'm so used to coding C with a procedural way, with just data is everything and functions that operate on data, that when I was teaching all those concepts, it was called, oh, really? And I had to tell that. So I told them, but I let the students know that that's an option.
There's another way, yeah.
Yeah, that's another way. And actually, procedural programming, it's so enjoyable because you really see everything that's happening in the low level. Mm-hmm. You focus on data. That for me, it's everything. It's the most important thing. At the end of the day, it's what you have. And then it's just operating over that data. And that's a bit the philosophy of Raylib. You got data that you move around and you just call functions that operate over that data, and sometimes they return you a value. I think that after many years working in that project, my mentality is so focused on that way of programming that when I look at the different abstractions of generative programming, C++, the evolution of C++, the solid concepts and everything, it's kind of, wow, no way. I mean, programming can be way simple than that and works, you know?
Yeah, no, that's, it's something we talk about a fair amount with guests on the show, I guess, which is like one of the nice things about game development is sometimes it feels like it gives you an opportunity to get down to like, the lower level and to get down to like simple abstractions and to just like, because, it just has to render once on the screen and like you don't have to maintain it for a million years and this kind of stuff, right? So yeah, but it's really interesting. So first of all, complete tangent, you taught at UPC, right?
Not this time.
Okay, cool.
I've been in several universities.
Yeah.
Because I usually taught for some time, maybe 1 year, 2 years. I make some money, and then I can be sometimes
back to Raylib.
Working on Raylib and the tools and all the ecosystem. So this last time I was working in, it's called Techno Campus.
Cool.
That is another university that is near Barcelona.
Mm-hmm.
That they also have a video games degree and a computer science degree. And this time I was teaching there. But before that, I was in the UPC for 2 years.
Cool.
It was 2020 to 2022, something like that.
Nice. Awesome. Cool. Yeah, they have I guess you would have been, the reason I asked is because UPC has a very famous student-run hackathon, but I guess it wouldn't have been running when you were there due to COVID.
Oh.
But yeah, they would have been a great audience for Raylib. So, you mentioned teaching Unity, and I think it's, you summarized, I guess, the challenges of teaching something like Unity to game dev students very well, which is just like, there's so many concepts, so many abstractions, but I guess at a more like holistic level, like at a higher level, when you just think about introducing people to game dev, like how do you explain to new developers like, hey, here is why you would choose Raylib versus why you would choose a Unity, a Godot, an Unreal, like a full-fledged engine?
Well, I think that, Raylib can teach you not only the basis of how things work in the inside, but also, be a guide to start your path. Actually, those first 6-7 years that I was teaching with Raylib was a pretty small part of the syllabus. It was like 60 hours in total. Then we jumped into, at that moment, it was into monogame. And after that, we jumped into Unity. And I thought that was a great path because Raylib was low level, was C. Then you jump into monogame. That actually Raylib is very inspiring in monogame with the naming conventions and the structures and everything. And with monogame, you can learn C#, you can learn some object-oriented programming and some more advanced concepts. And then when you understand that, you can jump into Unity because then all the game loop and everything is abstracted into Unity internal structure. But you can start working in a higher level, just managing the logic of the game and the assets and the data and the different scenes. So I think that's a great path, in my opinion. Start in a low level, try to understand how things really work. If possible, try to go a bit deeper, because that's another point about Raylib. It's designed in a way that the source code, it's very, very, very simple to read. Mm-hmm. It has a lot of comments, avoids any kind of complex programming techniques. It's very simple in terms of code. So students that want to dig further, actually, I had many students that had gone inside Raylib and then had send improvements and have, improved the library. Yeah, that's it. You can go inside and learn a bit deeper, different concepts, maybe about 3D, about models, about animation, about audio. You can go deeper, but after that, you can move on and you can move to other upper level frameworks or engines. And I think that's a great path, actually.
Yeah, I agree. That does sound really fantastic. And I guess along that way as well, there's like this perpetual issue in computer science education where like they try to teach the abstractions before the student has encountered the problem that requires the abstraction. I always think about this with like Git and version control, right? Like the universities try to teach version control before students have worked on big code bases with lots of people and understand why it's helpful to them. And so it's just another thing in the way. But in that path that you describe, you know, you get to see the low level and then you get introduced to monogame and you see like, okay, that takes away some of the low level. I know how the low level works, but now I know why I want this abstraction. And then you get to scenes in Unity. So I think that's a really great approach. That's awesome.
Yeah, actually, there is another point that we didn't mention. I got it in the head since the beginning. It's about building systems.
Right.
Because usually, in my experience, that's the point where most students struggle a lot with the build systems. I don't know, in the different places I've been teaching, usually I've seen a lot of problems in the students understanding how everything works.
Yeah.
In the sense that not how everything works, but how to configure properly a complete development environment.
Yeah.
I mean, not only maybe starting with compiling in the command line, but then setting up some, I don't know, makefile or some basic script. From there, try to grow it up. Maybe I don't like CMake, but maybe CMake or even Visual Studio, that is kind of a standard in the industry, I think, how to properly configure a project in Visual Studio. And then from there, move on and not only use the control version system, but even set up some continuous integration, continuous delivery that nowadays it's quite standard and quite simple to set up these kind of systems. That's one of the problems I found with the students. And well, I try to address as better as possible. But yeah, I think it's super important because at the end of the day, many students just want to write code and press the play button. That's the easy part, actually. Usually, if you are in a big company, there are many, many, many other side methods and processes that are as important as just compiling the code that need to be done and need to be understood. Someone has to do that work.
Yeah, I mean, we could turn this into a whole education episode, but yeah, 100% agree. And I think a lot of that instinct to just wanting to press the play button also comes from like, you know, a lot of the platforms for teaching code nowadays where they give you the fully working cloud environment, you just type the code and press play. You know, I always use the analogy of like, it's the difference between learning how to use a tool versus maintain the tool, right? Like you can learn how to carve a spoon with a sharp knife, but if you don't know how to sharpen the knife, then you're not going to be carving spoons very long, right? It's gonna blunt and you have to start again. Yeah, I think it's a fantastic point.
Yeah, but sometimes your spoon can broke, maybe.
Yeah.
And then you have to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. But you mentioned there, interestingly enough, so talking about the build systems and CI and stuff, I think this is a good time to talk about Raylib 5.5, given that you've got some fantastic new tooling in that, including solving this issue for very new people. So I guess to start with, so 5.5 was a big release, right? You were working on this one for a while.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's been 1 year of changes, like 800 changes or so, many changes. Yeah, well, I've been working on it for a year, mostly at this moment, and actually for the last 2 years or so, mostly reviewing and merging changes. And that's it. Mostly than in the past, I was adding features or adding examples or adding content. But for the last 2 years or so, I've been mostly doing the reviews. The reviews are merging and attending the community and helping the community and trying to help in all the initiatives in the community, organizing game jams and doing a lot of community work because actually has grown a lot. Yeah, it's difficult to manage.
That must be very exciting, but also I imagine as someone who likes writing code a lot, that must be a really interesting mindset change.
Yeah, well, actually, I still do, but I do with my tools. I develop tools, I publish the tools, and in that side, I write code a lot.
You've given the library to your community and you've gone to your little playground in the corner.
Yeah, actually, because as all the tools use Raylib as the base library, that's super good because at the same time that I'm developing the tools, if I need a new function, I can add it to Raylib, or if there is something that is broken in Raylib, I can fix it on the go. That's really great. Cool. But
5.5, what's new in 5.5?
Yeah. That was the question. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's been 1 year with all those changes. And for the last 2 months, approximately, it's been the time that I put to this release because I got a checklist with everything that should be done before any release. And it's a long checklist, actually. You have to check the compilation for all the platforms. You have to check the examples. You have to check the web. You have to check the different social networks. You have to create the installer. The installer for the new Raylib version, actually, it's created with Raylib itself. Actually, it's one tool that I sell to create installers. So actually, there are a lot of things, and not all of them work at first try, actually. Because for that last release, the last 2 nights, it was crazy because the installer was not. I'm about to release a new version of the installer. It was not properly tested, and actually, Raylib 5.5 installer is the test version.
No.
And there were some things that were not working as expected, and it was like, oh, I have to release this day, and well, it was a bit stressful, but yeah, it's out. And about the features of this new release, well, there are many, so I cannot list all them. But what I consider were some of the key features of the release was the improvement on the addition of 2 new platform backends. In Raylib 5.0, there was a big internal redesign of the library, that we have a core module that was a C file with 10,000 lines of code in a C file. And it was multiple defines to select the platform that it was building the code for.
I see.
So all that code was moved into separate modules to have one module for platform desktop, one module for platform Android, one module for platform DRM, that it's for embedded systems that run over the kernel. So it was moved all the code into separate modules. Not only that, it was created a template module to be able to add new platforms, just overwriting the set of functions required for that. And I kept the core module just like a wrapper to the different platforms. And then at compile time, you choose the platform you want and it compiles. So
very cool.
It worked super good. Actually, it has pushed the library during this year a lot. Actually, it has pushed it further than expected because, well, what happened that was some people pick up and start porting it to consoles, to Dreamcast, even Nintendo 64, PS Vita, PS4 Homebrew, PSP lately. So yeah, they only have to write one module, like core PS Vita, core PS4, put all the windowing inputs code in there, then enable the OpenGL 1.1 backend, and link with the platform libraries for the OpenGL 1.1 backend. So we have seen that's another of the features of the 5.5. We have seen a lot of porting of Raylib to all consoles, to retro consoles. It was like, wow, unbelievable.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, especially Dreamcast. That's wild.
Yeah, well, actually, even Spine is working on Dreamcast. Even, the 2D animation system is working on Dreamcast. That's, wow, it's amazing. But beside that porting to multiple consoles, 2 new backends have been added, also thanks to that split. That was a new library that just hit the market, an open source library that it's called, well, the naming for the graphics libraries are sometimes a bit complex, but it's RGFW.
Oh, yes, I'm familiar with it, yeah.
Yeah, it's a library for abstract the windowing and input system, but also supports Windows, Linux, Mac, also supports web lately, or it's about to support web. And yeah, I love single file header only libraries. And this is a single file header only library. For me, it's like, wow, that's great. Yeah, okay, it's maybe 7,000 lines. Never mind. And yeah, you can just drag and drop that library into your code. And yeah, and you got a full backend for multiple operating systems. So that's great. Well, it was added that backend option to Raylib because in the last month, I've seen a deceleration in the maintenance of GLFW library. That's another popular library. So just in case for the future, it was great to have some alternative supported by Raylib. And also in the same line, recently it was published, or I don't know if it's still in alpha or beta or it's officially published, but SDL3 library. That's a super popular library for windowing and inputs. Well, it's widely used in many games. But it also added a module for support multiple graphics libraries that at the moment is not used, but it's interesting to keep an eye on it. Mm-hmm. And well, another of the supported backends was SDL2 was already supported. So thanks to contributors, because all that has been done by contributors. So I just review it, what it was on the contributor, was the support for SDL3
Cool.
backend.
That's awesome.
So another feature, GPU skinning, that was also requested many, many times. That was when you compute the different positions on the animation.
Okay.
Every frame of animation, you have to reposition the vertex of the model, like in cinema, actually. You have to compute that position based on the skeleton of the model. And that process of computing the new positions of the vertex can be done in CPU. It's a lot of matrix operations, or it can be done in the GPU. Till now, for Raylib, it was done in CPU. That's great for small models, up to maybe 2,000 vertex. That's not a problem. But the community was asking for GPU skinning. Well, actually, they were asking it because Unity added it, and there are many Unity users. Probably they saw GPU skinning, and so they asked for GPU skinning. But it has been requested many, many times. I was quite reticent to add it because it requires some redesign, and also depending on the technique used to add the GPU skinning, all OpenGL versions, like OpenGL ES for Android or Raspberry Pi devices or embedded devices or web, it's not simple, has limitations to implement the GPU skinning because it requires more advanced OpenGL features. Right. But at the end, one animation programming professional, it's Daniel Holden, proposed an implementation that was pretty good and was also supported in all the devices and everything. And yeah, it was merged and added to Raylib as an additional option.
One thing I guess we haven't mentioned, so you mentioned the installer, but as well as the installer, you also have the project setup tool, I guess. They're all kind of interesting to me because, you know, you've got this like low level C header only library and you're starting to build out and include like, you know, ecosystem of tools around it where like I think the installer adds like you get a version of Notepad++ with it and everything as well, right?
Yeah.
How are you thinking about what's acceptable tooling to wrap around the library without taking you into like a full desktop engine situation, right? Like where's the line?
Yeah, well, actually that line it's quite difficult to set because okay, the point is that when you are working on a project for so long, usually all the maintenance becomes boring.
Right.
I mean, it's not enjoyable anymore there is a bug. What happens here? There are some pixels that are not drawing correctly when you rotate. And it takes a long time. Usually there are those kind of bugs that require a long time to investigate, to set up an environment just to test the bug properly, the multiple platforms, everything. It becomes boring.
You must have so many weird emulators installed to test all the weird consoles.
No. Actually, at this point, I don't have that
oh,
many.
Good.
So that's the truth. I never had a Mac, for example.
Yeah.
The Mac backend has mostly done.
That's someone else's problem now.
Yeah. The point is, maintenance becomes a boring task. So you are all the time thinking in other ways to make it more entertainment, the process of keep working on Raylib.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the result in this last release, I also released 1 month ago or so, a tool that it was intended to build project structures, mostly intended for newcomers. Because what I've seen in the past or along the years is that the new people that start with Raylib usually start with the .c file that plays anywhere. And they start working with that C file, they compile this C file, and they play with the C file. But at some point, you need to maybe create other C files or the modules. You need to include some additional libraries, some Raylib extra library. You need to add the resources, and you need to do a more, let's say, more professional project setup. What I said at the beginning, that what I've seen in the university, that when students have to do a full setup with the build system, continuous integration, continuous delivery, GitHub, licenses, README, contributors, conventions, all this, gitignore, all this kind of environment, full environment pieces, they usually struggle, they have problems. So despite I'm a bit against providing a tool to do that automatically, because I think that students should learn to do that, Well, I created a tool to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't fully do it. I mean, it sets it up automatically, right? But then like they're still working with it. It's not like it's abstracted away behind a UI. They get the output and they have to work with it, right? So yeah.
You just define some names, product name, project name, company name, resources, directories. You define some basic properties of the project. Yeah. And then the tool basically picks up a template that actually the tool is open source and the template is there. You can check that and modify, and just renames everything that needs to be renamed to follow the naming that the user has provided.
Yeah.
And it creates a project with pre-configured makefile, VS Code task, Visual Studio 220 task, a complete continuous integration system for multiple platforms to build the project and to make a release and automatically attach the build project. It configures the resources. So it gives you a README template with something pre-configured. Well, it gives you a full structure with many, many things already pre-configured. And then you can just pick that up, put it somewhere in your computer and upload it to GitHub. And you have a full base project to start working in a kind of more professional way to create not only small demos, but also some kind of a small mid-sized game.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was a tool. But going back to your question, where is the limit? Okay, I always have clear that the limit is that Raylib is not an engine. It does not pretend to be an engine. Probably a high-level framework in the borderline between an engine, but not at that point. Because I think that an engine, in my experience, some of the things that need to be provided are some kind of a screen manager system, some kind of system to manage the different screens of the game, some kind of entities or game object managing system.
Yeah,
that could be a simple array, but could be something more a list or something more complex. And the third part that I think every engine should have is the content manager, the resource manager or the asset manager, an integrated system to process all the resources and manage all the resources. So I think those three systems are the three key parts an engine should have. And Raylib doesn't have those parts. And actually, it's supposed that the user can build those parts by themselves. And I think they are not that complex. Actually, there is a screen manager example in Raylib as an example that it's a simple switch that can change from one screen with another to another screen, even with some transitions. So it's kind of fancy. To manage the object, you can have only a list of an array. So it shouldn't be that dramatic. And for the content manager part, that's probably the more complex part, I created the REST library with an REST packer tool, trying to kind of supply that third part that would make Raylib more aligned with an engine.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's the line I said.
Yeah,
but beside the line, I mean, even with that line, you can do very interesting things. Like, for example, the project configurator, the Raylib project creator, it's one of those things. It's a tool that sets up all the project. And now, actually, I'm thinking about another tool. I'm thinking I got it designed and I haven't released it yet, maybe in the future. That's another step that I also seen sometimes could be dramatic for people starting with Raylib. That could be like a third tool to do easy the process to build games to multiple platforms.
I feel like we talk about it too much on the show, but we talk with game developers a lot about porting to other platforms and what a nightmare it is. So I can definitely see how that would be a useful tool.
And yeah, for that reason, tools like Unity, Unreal, Godot are so successful. Actually, that's always the most complex part of game development. Besides big games that try to push the graphics to the limits or try to innovate a lot in some aspects, usually building for multiple platforms, it's a drama.
Yeah. So we've spoken a lot throughout our chat about, how big the ecosystem is and the fact that people are contributing more and more. And, you're now in a position of being much more in reviewer and maintainer mode. In lead up to this, I always have a little poke about the projects, look at the ecosystem, look at what's doing. I do not understand how you have the time to do everything you do. I think your Reddit alone is ridiculous, let alone Discord, let alone running your own game jams, let alone all of it. So I guess just straight at the top, like, what is your community management approach to this project? Like, how do you think about managing and growing and nurturing that community as a maintainer?
I don't have that much time. Actually, don't sleep much. So, well, 6 hours per day. So it's okay. But in the last 2 years, or probably in the last 3 or 4 years, my time put into the social networks and the Raylib community in general has been increasing a lot day after day. Maybe I remember I started by 2020 because of the pandemic that I was at home and everything. And maybe I spent 1 or 2 hours a day. At the moment, I'm spending probably 5-6 hours a day easily, and that's a lot of time, and not only in the computer, but a lot of time in the with the mobile phone.
Yeah.
And well, I got multiple communities: X, Blue Sky recently, Reddit, YouTube, Discord. Discord is the community where I spend most time because I've seen the community there growing super fast, and actually it's a super nice community. I've spent a lot of time welcoming new users, trying to help, trying to answer their questions, trying to engage with them. I do a lot of everyone to try to create that engagement. And I also did a lot of actions in X and now in Blue Sky, trying to create content and trying to engage the audience in that sense with some banner, with some images. But yeah, you have to think about it. You have to create it. You have to try to publish it in a certain moment that you think it's gonna work. And actually, the community management work, it's a full-time job if you do it. And also, what I've noticed in the last few months is that it's probably taking too much time of my time, the different communities, the different social networks from Raylib, from developing, for example, the tools or the separate libraries. I got several tools that have not been published yet and I want to publish. The installer that I published with Raylib as installer was supposed to be published 1 month ago in my timelines. So I'm trying to manage that at the moment some way, but it's so addictive, you know?
Yeah. Very instant feedback, right?
Yeah, but it's not only the instant feedback. It's that you have created something that has become super popular, and there is a lot of people that maybe send you mails and write you private message and contact you and are using that tool and ask you for help, that somewhat you feel like you have to do that.
Yeah.
That it makes sense.
Yeah.
And it becomes addictive. And yeah. Well, at the moment, I'm trying to manage, trying to manage it better and trying to limit the time I put on the social networks and on the community. But it's true that for the last 2 days, since I published Raylib 5.5, I've been connected.
Around big releases, it makes sense to be a little bit more online, I guess.
Yeah. Raylib has been released 2 days ago, and there have been like 15 merges already, 15 pull request merges in those 2 days. That is, no, it is certainly a lot of work for one person. It's too much work for one person. Financially, it's not sustainable. That's also
that was going to be my next question, because I mean, I know I've seen you mention in interviews in the past that, you know, you've gone from, you previously had a cycle of having a full-time job and then coming back to Raylib, having a full-time job at Raylib. I know you've received various grants over the years, but I think I saw in a Discord AMA that I think as recently, I think it was in September, that you said, you know, currently the project is not super sustainable and it's hard to do basic maintenance. So how economics of open source is always an issue. How are you currently, you know, maintaining this work? Yeah.
I wish I had a good answer for you. Like, yeah, it's funded with, well, at the moment I received some donations. I got GitHub sponsors where I got some sponsors, and I also got some patrons. All the numbers are open. Okay, so you can go there on GitHub sponsor or on Patreon and check the numbers. Donations are quite low. I think it's about $700 per month, something like that.
Open source.
Not that much. Yeah. I tried to make some kind of business with all the tools, with the Raylib technologies, and I publish tools. Some tools are free, actually, but some tools are paid. And they actually sell, but neither very low numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And beside that, I maintain Raylib by my punctual contract work that I do. Here in Barcelona, for example, I collaborate with a game BCN that helps new companies, new startups, video game startups to start.
Oh, cool.
And I collaborate with them with consulting, different educational, like optimization, methodologies, processes. I help them with that. And beside that, I work from time to time in the university to teach some subjects for a span of time. At the moment, that's my situation.
Yeah. Lots of moving parts.
Yeah, it's different moving parts, but yeah, I'm quite concerned about that, you know, because it's not, I have no stability,
right?
You know, that's not stable in the long term, and it's neither sustainable.
Yeah.
So I'm just living a bit day to day, and I'm thinking what to do next. Actually, it's complicated.
Yeah. Such a, also just, you know, two industries renowned for being unstable economically, being a video games developer and being an open source developer. And there you are sat in the middle of them. Well, if you're listening to this, folks, and you've got some GitHub sponsorship money, you know where to put it. Raylib. I highly recommend. So we are coming towards the end of our time. So there's one last question I wanted to ask you. I know you've just released 5.5 and you're very focused on that, but I guess what's next? Are we talking a 6.0? Is it a 5.6? What's next on the roadmap?
The truth is that for the last 2 years or so, I've been saying that, okay, that's the last release.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
And I try to move on and look for something else. But then when the release happens, there is so much engagement in the following weeks and months that I just keep working on it. And also it's true that I see the project and I believe in it. You know, I think, wow, that's a great project. And most of the people that has tried Raylib really praise it and really love it. So I hardly ever hear bad reviews about the library. A lot of people really enjoy it. Here I have something that could help a lot of people, but not only in education, but to spread programming, to spread low-level programming, to get a better understanding on video games development. I mean, I really believe in the project, and that's probably what keeps me pushing it month after month and year after year to try to make it somewhat sustainable at some point.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's it. So I don't know what's next already. For the moment, I am focused on a couple of tools that I want to get out. I want to publish maybe before Christmas. I don't know. Then there is one tool that we're talking about that when I created the project, the Raylib Project Creator, I planned a second tool, but well, I probably can't tell you what's it, that it's a project builder that in a similar way, you can just click a button and get an Insta build for Windows, for web, or for other platforms. Maybe I will release that small tool as a support tool for Raylib. I don't know what's next. I don't know what's next. The community is already pushing to other graphics APIs.
Actually, I have seen the endless discussion about Vulkan.
but actually, there is already some user, because, okay, usually the community is always asking for things. But, but there are not that many people doing the things they ask for.
Sure.
But it seems that there are a user that has created a backend for DirectX 12.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it's already functional.
That's a big job.
That's a big job, indeed. And yeah, and I saw that and it was, oh, that's super interesting. Maybe we can open that box and consider supporting other graphics APIs other than only OpenGL. But yeah, again, the amount of work, not only to do that it's a big amount of work, to do that, to integrate that, to maintain that, it's so big that it's scary.
Yeah.
I can't do that alone.
But then, as you say, the fact that someone has gone as far as to, start that themselves is a good, hopefully it's a positive indicator that you won't be doing it alone, and that this is someone who's going to get really engaged. And
absolutely. And actually, I got some people in the Raylib community. Shout out for Jeff. It's really pushing Raylib community a lot, and it's a creator of Raylib extras, and actually is doing a lot for Raylib. We have to have a discussion. We set the discussion after Raylib 5.5, so probably now it's the moment to see what direction can the project go from here now. Yeah, let's see. So it's an adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. Fingers crossed it's an eventually gets a little bit easier. But for now, thank you very much for your time today, Ramon. It's been wonderful. Thanks for spending the time with us and running us through so many amazing details about the API and the community. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, thank you very much to you. Thanks for inviting me. And actually, it's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you.